And we're recording. This is the Kubernetes SIG Network meeting for October 18th, 2018. And let's jump right into it. So first on the list was the SIG test review. I was just taking a look over the test grid, and it looks like everything is passing. We have no failures. So I'm happy to move on from this unless folks have particular testing things they'd like to discuss. All right, let's move on to the second item, which is I wanted to do a quick spin through what we've targeted for 1.13 and check in on how each of those are going. Hopefully we have some folks here who can talk to what they're working on. So let me share my screen. And then we'll take a look over here at the SIG planning spreadsheet. So 2 or 3 meetings back, we wrote this up and said we would check back in the middle of October. So why don't we go down the list, and if you're working on this, please give maybe a quick overview of where we're at. So starting with IPv6, I think that would be you, Dane.
Yep, sure. So the first item, we're actually making good progress. The PR that I had put in, we split into 2. One is just doing the kube test part of it, and the second part is a prop config. The kube test part is just got merged yesterday, so that we're really happy with. That took 6 months, but we're finally there. So now that's been compiled into one of the Kubekin end-to-end Docker image, and that seems to work. So now we're just waiting for I have to convert a prop config to set up a job that's going to run periodically, and so we're probably hopefully a few days away from having something running.
Very cool.
So in the second item, we're still looking for KEP reviews, and there's an issue that I've added to the agenda today, a kind of gotcha. I mean, the main question remaining. I think the API stuff is pretty settled, but the main question remaining is whether we want single service IPs versus dual stack service IPs, and there's an issue with that I have in the agenda. And some coding has begun. There's a couple PRs. I'm about to submit a third PR for code changes. So we're plugging away on it, starting the code changes. That's it for me.
Awesome, thank you. Next on the list was proposing ingress future. I think that was Bowie, if you're on the call.
Yep, I owe you guys an update on that one. But that one, we're working on it. So there'll be something coming very soon.
Cool. Core DNS, I think, is also on the agenda for later, but maybe we can just do a quick high-level status.
Yes, so addressing the scale issue, the PR is right out. So I just wait someone is approving the PR that Chris pushed today. And then with that, we can verify we address the scale in 5,000 nodes. It's the only way to verify on 5,000 nodes is to have this PR approved. And this PR is also putting Core DNS as default. So if the test is okay, Core DNS would be default. It's we need this PR to be in. If it's not okay, then we will see. We still have some optimization possible.
Okay, so the plan there is that we will test the fix kind of post-merge, and we're pretty confident it'll be fixed, but if it's not, then we'll have to...
Then we have to put another release with another optimization. But yes, we are pretty confident. We did a lot of scale, but only until 2,000 nodes. We can do with pre-submit only until 2,000 nodes.
Okay, cool.
So I put the... Sorry.
Been pushed already, so you should be able to pull 124 now.
Yes, it is done, and all the checks are done. So the PR is now all green. We just need, I put the PR number in the notes of the meeting, agenda of today, and we need someone to LGTM on this PR. The test, all the end-to-end tests are green. Okay. The one that happened with automatically with the PR.
Can you just assign the PR to me?
Yeah, sure.
All right, next on the list is kubectl changes for PodReady++. We don't have anybody down for that. Was that Minhan working on that?
It would be Minhan. He's not here today.
Okay. Okay, so we can leave that one for now unless anybody else knows of any status updates for it. Topology-aware routing of services. We had set a goal to agree a KEP.
So John's not here.
I'm on the call, Tim.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I did a bunch of research to see whether we wanted to do anything snazzier because we had use cases for it, but really couldn't justify anything more than the simple case. So I will sort of revise the existing KEP probably and update that for early next week.
Cool. Is that this? No, where's I guess we don't have a link to the KEP in here. John, are you the correct owner to have in here now?
Yeah, for now at least, for sure.
I mean, let's be clear. I forget who wrote the original KEP, but I don't think we want to take it away from anybody. If they're still around and they want to participate, then they're welcome to take it back and drive on it.
Okay.
I'll list you both there for now, and we can give that some time. So next is full audit of conformance. This is something I put my name next to, and I have started just by wrapping my head around what we've got currently for conformance tests. I'm hoping to get something I can send around to folks at some time soon, trying to identify what we've got and what we might want to, what kind of gaps we may want to close there, if any. Windows Kube proxy.
Yeah, so we're still targeting GA for 1.13. For passing conformance tests, we have some SIG network tests related to DNS that I added to the agenda to discuss afterwards.
Cool. And the node local cache KEP.
Yeah, the KEP got sent out 2 weeks back, and we got some feedback and conversations, mostly trying to close out 1 or 2 open items there. Implementation has also begun. So yeah, work is going on.
Great. So it sounds like there is progress being made. Anything else anybody would like to raise on this list before we move on? All right. in that case, let's carry on. So next on the list was David to talk about the DNS tests that we just mentioned briefly.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name is David. I'm here from the SIG Windows community, where we're trying to bring Kubernetes support to Windows. Obviously, our main metric to graduate Windows from beta is like by announcing like kubelet and kubeproxy, those libraries to go GA through conformance tests. Now, most of these conformance tests, they run on Windows without any changes, thanks to like Linux aliases that we have available on Windows containers that are calling like our correct routines or functions under the cover. Now, I added an agenda item here because there are some special cases where the behavior on Windows is slightly different than on Linux. And I'm here to discuss one of these cases that affects the two DNS conformance tests. So the one for DNS for cluster, I think I linked that in the agenda, and then DNS for services. So let me explain it perhaps a little bit more specifically. So we're seeing different behavior on on the Windows DNS resolver versus the Linux DNS resolver, in the sense that like in how we are trying to resolve names that contain dots. So let me perhaps post an example in the chat. Let's say, for example, if we have a DNS suffix, like in our etc resolve conf, we have something similar on Windows that's programmed that way. On Windows, we're seeing the following. If we try to resolve the DNS name the same way like the test tries to resolve like Kubernetes, for example, that should append the DNS suffixes that we have programmed to add like the namespace and service.cluster.local to form the appropriate lookup. The same way we can also look up fully qualified domain name, like let's say if we try to resolve kubernetes.default.service.cluster.local. Those behaviors are the same on Linux and Windows as expected. Now the difference comes in whenever we try to look up names that contain a period, so not a trailing dot, but a period in the actual string, like for example, kubernetes.default or kubernetes.default.service. So all those cases are treated differently on Windows than on Linux. The difference is that Windows is treating it as an absolute or as an authoritative string, as if it's like a fully qualified domain name, basically, whereas Linux treats it as a relative name. So it still appends the service.cluster.local to the string that we're trying to look up.
So David,
yeah.
in Linux, that's controlled with the end dots in the resolve.conf. Is there no equivalent in Windows?
Yeah, I'm following up on that. If we have any special like configuration parameters, and certainly if we don't, we should. So we'll have follow-up work to make sure that we have some equivalency and an equivalent implementation. But for right now, I don't see an equivalent parameter to configure that behavior. And my question was whether it is acceptable to tailor this conformance test to the nuances of our like OS-specific DNS resolver, just to be able to not block Windows going from Windows to go GA. Perhaps while we work on similar configuration parameters like ndots, the same way that Linux does, or are there really important features or use cases that have a need to resolve partial domain names like this? That's kind of my question.
So this is Tim. I clearly have thoughts, but I would like to hear what other people think before I come out on that.
I mean, well, I can give an opinion. I mean, I think that the expectation is that those partial names work, and that customers are likely relying on that. So if we're talking about conformance, then it would be best to figure out a way to make it work. I mean, it's sort of not conformant if it doesn't work. So
yeah, but but these customers are deploying Windows applications, and using dotted names like that does not work on Windows today. So
I see what you're saying. That for Windows, so it's only Windows applications. I mean, it's not just generic. What about? Couldn't you have a mixed cluster where they're trying to reach out to some service that's running on Linux? That, I mean, I guess they know they're deploying on Windows, and they can make those configurations. But
yeah, and those aren't things that I would expect to change in the Kubernetes YAML. Those are things that would just be how their app is working. So they would either use, you know, single name, short name, or an FQDN.
Right, so and that's part of their configuration that they pass in.
Yeah.
This topic came up in SIG architecture this morning in exactly the same context, but not the exact same detail. And there was an argument made that I think holds a lot of water, which is sort of principle of least surprise or non-surprise. And I don't think a Windows consumer would be surprised that that doesn't work. It is unfortunate that it's sort of part of the API, at least in the DNS extension. Well, no, I guess it's not. The NDOS isn't actually codified, right? Like the custom DNS policy has a search paths field, but it will behave differently on Windows than it does on
Windows.
Windows.
It doesn't specify what those actually are.
And NDOS isn't a schema field, it's in the options.
Yeah, NDOS is not.
So I guess it's not actually even an API breakage. So the question then is it okay for Windows to be different in this regard? My feeling is it's probably okay. Unfortunately, the conformance program doesn't have an affordance yet for this is conformant on Windows and this is conformant on Linux. So by taking it out of the conformance test, I think the only option we've got is to just take it out completely.
Well, we do have an affordance, for example, like if you're running on GCE, then the conformance test behaves one way versus not on GCE. I think that same test has additional assertions in that case.
Well,
I know they're getting rid of those. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to mention is that this is just a test case problem. So if we were to just allow the test case to test resolve in Kubernetes with no dot, that would work on both Linux and Windows.
So Patrick, the test case is passing 3 of the names. So it's like the test case passes Kubernetes, Kubernetes.default, and Kubernetes.default.svc. So the 3 names are passed, and all 3 names are checked against the result. So for Windows, the Kubernetes alone passes. So it's like we can split the test case and keep the Kubernetes as a conformance and keep the other 2 resolving name as a new test case that only works for Windows, only works for Linux. Is that an option?
I'm fine with splitting the test case from a tactical point of view. It makes sense. And so we can then at least have the conversation where we say same namespace, short names always work. That's part of conformance. And cross namespace names is up for debate as to whether that's conformance. I think that's fine. The question is whether we actually want to allow conditional conformance. I mean, I take that back. I think we effectively have to allow conditional conformance, where in this case, the only condition we support is the architecture or the OS. But I don't know that the conformance leads have sort of formalized that yet. So from a tactics point of view, can somebody send a PR to break that into 2 separate test cases? And then we'll loop in the conformance people and see what they think about it.
Yes.
I'm okay with it. I don't think we have a lot of choice there, and I don't think it's reasonable to hold that line. Somebody disagree with me?
Unless Windows is going to implement that soon.
Well, then we can promote it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good argument that the people, I mean, obviously they know they're deploying on Windows, and so they're going to expect it to behave in a certain way.
Yeah, and honestly, we shouldn't base the conformance on what's available in the current OSs we support. We should base the conformance on principles, right? And we've sort of conflated the 2 in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so send a PR perhaps, and then we'll loop into conformance.
That's right. Send a PR just to break it into 2 test cases, and then we can say specifically, we're failing this case and we're passing that case.
Okay.
Okay. Tim, just one question. I'm looking at the test, this specific test right now, which is conformance IT. There is already if it is GC or GKE, then we added 2 other name to resolve, google.com and metadata. So do you mean that we should not have any if provider in the conformance? So we need to split this part, that existing part also?
I think that's probably true. I think that the testing of resolving of external names should not be covered by conformance. I don't think that's a requirement for Kubernetes that every cluster would be able to resolve external names.
So
True.
to clarify,
we need the test. We don't need it to be in the conformance part of the test.
Yeah. Okay. So right now the conformance test is already a little wrong because there is inside the conformance test a 2 case, in fact, the one that we are in GC, GKE, and the one that we are not. All right.
We should root those out of the conformance part of it.
Okay.
Casey, you were going to look at the conformance stuff, right?
Yep, I had already spotted that one, and I've made a note of it.
Cool. We should. I think we're one of the networking is going to be one of the harder conformance things to tease apart what is implementation, what is conformance. So it's good to just discuss them sort of case by case.
Yes. Cool. So I think we've got a plan there. So let's move on to Dane with the dual stack design question.
Yeah, thanks. So this may be a question better suited for the mail list, but I'll just describe it just for food for thought, I guess. But in the current dual stack design, we're proposing that we just support a single family of service IPs, but things like node port and external IPs would support dual stack access. And having the single family service IPs is going to be a simplified implementation and save some work. At least that's the thought. But there's one thing that I've been thinking about where it may be more work, a little bit more work involved in supporting the single family service IPs. And the problem is that when a user configures a node port service, that service always gets a service IP assigned along with the node port. And in the IP tables, all the rules are set up for both the service IP and the node port. In this dual stack design, when the user configures a node port service, there'll be one of the tables, either IP tables or IP6 tables, that will have both a service IP and a node and listening on a node port, and the other tables will just be configured to listen on the node port. So I'm not sure I'm not really familiar with the workflow in kubeproxy, but there may be a dependence of when a node port service is configured that, first it configures the service IP and that sets up the load balancing, everything. And then it tags in it adds in the node port access. So in order to implement this, single family service IPs with the dual stack node port, we may have to rearrange a lot of the workflow of kubeproxy. I don't know if I made myself clear enough or anybody has any thoughts on that. Go ahead.
Is this hypothetical, like you don't know, or is this hypothetical like you've looked at it and you think that's the solution?
The only thing I've looked at are the NAT rules, and I see that for when you set up a node port, it's got the front end for the service IPs and the front end for the node port, and then they both refer to the same load balancing part at the end. But I have not looked at the kubeproxy code to see if it first does a service IP, and then that does 80% of the work, and then the node port is added afterwards, just tacking on to the tail end of the rules.
Yeah, that's basically right. I mean, well, it's right in sort of the sequence of the code, but the code also, what it generates is an IP tables restore file, which it then restores atomically. So there's not actually a like real-time sequencing problem, I think, if that's what you're getting to.
It's not, yeah, I'm not worried about the real-time sequencing more. I thought that it would take a lot of code refactoring so that you could do node port without depending on the service IP work already have been being done.
Yeah, maybe. It might be worthwhile refactoring anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's one big function that basically processes all the different conditions in sequence. And so I would guess the refactoring we want is to take the logic for generating the per service and per endpoint chains and breaking that out into a separate function that you can call from the different places depending on whether you're the primary family or not.
Okay, well, that sounds like it's not a real big showstopper then. They will just keep going ahead with a single family service IP approach and see if...
I think it's still a net.
What was that, Tim?
I think it's still overall a net simplification and not worth going back on just yet.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Dane. Next up, we've got Francois for Kubernetes.
Yes, I think at Kubernetes, I already said my main concern was the approval for PR, so now it's assigned to Tim. Tim, just one thing about scalability. We had the meeting with SIG Scalability last week to define, how do we, what does it mean passing the test for Core DNS, knowing that the memory was not exactly counted the same way Core DNS or KubeDNS. The point of view of Foshtech on SIG Scalability is pass the test. As long as you pass the test, you are good. So I think maybe the test does not evaluate everything, but if the test is improved, then you will have to pass the test again.
I think that's fair. If you make Wojtek happy, you make me happy.
Okay, so it looks like. You just need to push the button. All right, thank you.
All right, and last up is Alexei.
Hello, I'm from Kubernetes community. Do you hear me?
You're very
Blown out.
blown out. Yeah.
Can you pull the microphone? No, now we just can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
That's better. No.
And I'm using Zoom first time. Okay, I will try to tune.
That's better. It's just soft. We can at least understand you now.
All right. Okay. Right now, is it better?
Perfect.
Oh, okay. Okay, I will continue. We are trying to implement the host user support in Kubernetes. It's a CNI plugin. It's a sub-project of OpenStack. It's a plugin for using OpenStack ports, Neutron ports. Maybe if you know. We are following the same approach as Intel's the host user CNI plugin. So we have only the host user Unix domain socket, but we don't have ATH0 interface inside a container. So we faced the issue that Kubernetes in as enter approach doesn't work for us because there's no interface inside container. So I prepared a page, and then Williams already reviewed it. It's a third pull request, but unfortunately I was not able to push into the same pull request. So I had an issues with this page, and I had questions to Dan Williams. Unfortunately, he did not answer the question I had. So I would
Can you tell us more?
We'll review it.
Sorry, can you talk more about what it is that you guys are doing? I'm not familiar with it.
It's about CNI output. Currently, Kubernetes CNI library doesn't read IP address from plugins output. It obtains IP address from container. It reads ATH0 network interface IP address, like Docker does. And
hey, Alexei, quick one for you. So I'm not exactly familiar with what the particular limitation of CNI is, but I'm gonna shoot a link in chat here. Is that there's been a total refactor of that vhost user CNI that is now a user space CNI. And it supports a number of quote-unquote engines for kind of user space networking through CNI. So I'm gonna just throw the link in here, as you might find it useful as a reference, or as a project to contribute your work to otherwise. So just wanted to let you know about that.
Yes, as I remember, Dan mentioned that he wanted to do something with CNI, and I remember he wanted to do something similar. But we don't see some reference link or something else, maybe specification or already prepared patches.
All right. Also, just a FYI, I'm just struggling with the mobile app, so I can't paste the link to it. But if you Google user space CNI GitHub, you'll find it as the first link, just so you know.
User space CNI, okay. Thank you. So that's all for my side.
So just to be clear, are you looking for a patch to be merged? Are you looking for feedback? I wasn't clear to me what the result of this is.
Both feedbacks and maybe yes, just a feedback, I think.
Okay, and you sent this to the container networking org or to Kubernetes? I don't think I've seen it.
It's about Kubernetes networking, I think.
Yeah, that's a Kubernetes PR. I think the link is in the meeting notes.
Okay, I'll try to take a look at that this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so that was the last item on the agenda. So unless there's anything else that would be good to discuss now, we can get 22 minutes back.
All right. Everybody go write some tests. I mean, fix some tests. Don't write new ones.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all next time.
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you.